Hello everybody and welcome to Card of the Week, and good news! Russell's here! Woo! Alright, if you don't know what Card of the Week is, I'm going to talk about a card, talk about whatever the conversations come to mind. I'm here on my third favorite website, Arkham Build, so why don't we roll a card and see what the conversation is today. Grisly Totem! Interesting! So, this is a 3-cost asset in both the Survivor and Seeker class. And it's a little bit of a bonus. We're going to talk about the upgraded versions as well. As a reaction, after you commit a card to a skill test, exhaust Grisly Totem, that card gains another instance of one of its skill icons of your choice. It takes up the accessory slot, and this card came out in the Circle Undone, most notably in the Secret Name expansion pack. So, right off the bat, the first thing that you need to know about Grisly Totem and what makes it so special is, Russ, maybe don't attack the computer, I'm trying to record a video here, is that this is a multi-class card. So this was a very big new sort of thing in Arkham Horror that they never really experimented with before and only experimented with once after in Edge of the Earth when they came out and there was a bunch of multi-class cards in there. The multi-class cards work a little bit differently than they worked in Edge of the Earth. Grisly Totem, and then there was also, let's see if I can remember them all. There was the Enchanted Blade, there was Scroll of Secrets, there was the Tommy gun, the 45 Thompson, and then there was the Tennessee Sour Mash, and then Grisly Totem rounded it out. So those were those 5 cards, and instead of upgrading into multi-class cards, each one of these upgraded into like one of the 2 classes. So as you can see here, we can kind of just quickly check. There was a Seeker one, and then it goes back, and there was a Survivor one. And this is how all of these worked. The coolest thing about these cards was that it was an entirely new sort of thing. It was a new sort of like mechanic and design space that the design team was starting to come out with, right? And well, if you played Magic the Gathering, gold cards, like multicolor cards, multi-class cards, weren't necessarily like new ground where it's like, oh my god, I've never seen anything like this happen before, right? But just the idea that Arkham was beginning to explore new space was very cool. The big challenge with multi-class cards is that they, in theory, need to represent both of their classes, right? So this card, Grisly Totem, it's not a Survivor card, it's not a Seeker card, it's a Survivor and a Seeker card. So the question becomes, where do these classes meet, right? And I think some of these were pretty elegant, right? Like, for example, the Tennessee Sour Mash, Survivors and Rogues want to defend themselves in the Mythos phase, and they can potentially help with the willpower, and there's also like the illicit items that come with it. The Enchanted Blade, Guardians want to fight, and Mystics use charges, so that's where it kind of meets. Scroll of Secrets gives you some sort of like deck control manipulation, which both Seekers and Mystics want. The Thompson doesn't really feel very roguey, but you know, it's a gun, I guess that counts. And Grisly Totem met at the intersection of the idea of skill cards, right? Where Survivor and Seeker are both the skill class, so what if we had the skill icons be kind of like the skill cards be the thing for the Grisly Totem here? Now, let's take a second and look back at what Survivors and Seekers existed at this time that played with skill cards, right? This was still early on in the game's lifespan, even though it was the 4th cycle. This is, I think, at a point where like the card pool was still young, but it was like, I think I point at Circle Undone personally as kind of like the first turning point when the card pool became from a small collection to starting to grow into the mid-level collection, like kind of like before we got to like the later part of Legacy where you could do anything. There were still a lot of holes in your deck that you weren't able to fill when Circle Undone came out. But when Circle Undone came out, you started to be like, okay, there are some options here. I'm starting to see a bit more control over my deck building thing, like my choices that I make here. So if we look at the Survivors that were out in this pool that kind of committed skills, because everyone kind of could because there were still the neutral cards, but again, as I said, they were kind of starting to like phase out a little bit. They were kind of like starting to kind of like shift out of because you had just more choices. People weren't excited about like the cantrip skills. I personally still love them, but I'm talking about like looking back in history and how things were. So we had Ashcan Pete, and we had Minty Fan, right? We look at some of the others. There's Wendy. She could commit skills, but she was kind of leaning more into the rogue stuff. She had lockpicks at this point, so she was kind of building more into the succeed by 2. There was, the Seeker was Daisy. Daisy wasn't frickin' with this, right? At least on the level 0 version when it came out. There was, in Dunwich, we had Rex. He didn't worry about this. He was just too busy just like speed running through the game with Higher Education and Dr. Milan Christopher. And then we had, in Carcosa, there was Min, but there was also Will Yorick. Didn't care about this. He wasn't frickin' with it. And then in Forgotten Age, we had Kelvin. No, Kelvin's not playing, doesn't have the time to play Grisly Totem. And then our Seeker in that one was Ursula, who also, again, she was kind of focusing more on the movement. So then in Circle Undone, we got Rita Young and Joe Diamond, I think, is our Seeker in that. So, like, again, not really where this is one of it wants to be. And, like, Grisly Totem 0, beyond the card text, which we're going to get to, kind of had a hard time finding a home. Because the effect on this card, like the line of text on this card, isn't actually bad, right? Like, just basically like doubling one icon skill cards, or alternatively, I mean, just even cards. They don't even need to be skill cards. You could just be like committing cards to a test, but people naturally went to skill cards with it, right? It's like not a bad card, but it's this kind of like this beautiful magic that exists in all sort of game design and all sort of card design, where you have to look at all parts of the card, not just one part of the card, right? And this card cost 3 and took up your accessory slot. The accessory slot still wasn't like hyper competitive at this point. Like, there were still a lot of good options, but nothing was like, you need to play this or you die. It's like Lucky Case and Rogue was starting to take that, like, took that spot, but it wasn't as contested in some of these other places. But the 3 cost really killed this card. It was just like not worth it for 3 resources to just make all of your cards slightly better, right? So it's like one of those things where a lot of the time, this whole cycle of like, so this part of the cycle was kind of just brushed over. Everybody played Enchanted Blade. Everyone played Scroll of Secrets when it was tabooed. Everybody was playing the Thompson because it was a killer weapon. A lot of rogues and survivors were playing Tennessee Sour Mash, but no one was really touching Grisly Totem. And it's that 3 cost that just kind of really kind of pushed it out. Another part of this is that only really one of the upgrades on this card are really like bang on, I want to play this. So I know we're just talking about like Grisly Totem was the starting point, but we are going to look at their upgrades because I think they are particularly relevant. And quick, there's Russ on the bed. Everyone say hi to Russ on the bed. Let's start by looking at the Survivor one. As a reaction, it's 2 cost and now 3 experience. So the cost went down, but the experience is now 3. As a reaction, after you commit a card to a skill test, exhaust Grisly Totem. That card gains another instance of one of its skill icons of your choice, and if that skill test fails, return that card to your hand. Now, let me ask you, dear viewer at home, do you see an issue here? And I think that this issue is one that, when you're reading this card just in a vacuum, you're like, yeah, I would love skill card protection. But the first part kind of breaks the second part, right? Where you're gaining another instance of the skill icon. That's great. It makes me more likely to pass the test. And then the second one, it's like, oh, that's great. That's protection, right? That's protection. That skill card now is going to guarantee that I'm going to hit it during a test. Its effects are going to go off, and I'm going to walk out of this as a winner and as a champion. But most of the time, you're going to pass that test. Because now, like, for example, your Overpower with Ashcan Pete and Duke is now letting you attack for 7. So you're going to pass and hit that test. And suddenly, when you're playing Grisly Totem 3 from the Survivor class, you're looking at, after you commit a card to a skill test, exhaust Grisly Totem. That card gains another instance of one of its skill icons of your choice. And I don't know about you, but that sounds awfully familiar to me, right? So really, when you're paying 3 XP for this upgraded version of the card, you're really only getting a 1 cost reduction for the majority of the use case of the actual card. And I've read your comments. I know that people are already saying, yeah, but it's protected me from these skill icons. But like this already existed in the form of like try again, right? Which I believe came out in Dungeon, but again, I could be wrong. I'm pulling out these numbers off the top of my head. So who actually knows how on the money or off base I am with that? But the reality was just that this effect was not powerful enough to actually make this useful, so this never really got played. One thing we do got to shout out is the changing art, where the art kind of changes slightly, and then we go to the Seeker version. And the Seeker version is bomb diggity. 3 cost, 3 experience. As a reaction, after you commit a card to a skill test, exhaust Grisly Totem. That card gains another instance of one of its skill icons of your choice, and if that skill test is successful, the performing investigator draws 1 card. This is a phenomenal card. This is a phenomenal upgrade because it does what the original does, but more, as opposed to less in the way that the Survivor one does. I'm not going to say that the Survivor one doesn't feel Survivor and the Seeker one doesn't feel Seeker, right? But it's one of those things where I feel like the Survivor one maybe could have taken some more time in the pool and explored the Survivor space of it in a more interesting way. The Seeker one, however, is fantastic. It was playable in Min from the get-go, and Dream Eaters came out when we had the Dream Diary. Like, this kind of just, like, became an archetype all in of itself. Like, a Grisly Totem deck was just, like, one of its own things. And, like, it just became, like, it's just like a very, very powerful card. One of my personal favorite use cases for Grisly Totem, 3 for the Seeker one, was in a Vincent Lee deck, where you use your On the Mends, which are practically free. With Jessica Hyde, they kind of are free, to just kind of draw more cards and cycle through your deck really quickly. It was a fantastic time. However, with all this said, the funniest thing about this, and again, it just shows how I think that this card is ultimately not worth it for the price, because while it does something good, its cost is just too much. Most of the time, when players are playing Grisly Totem decks, if they're going to the level 3 Seeker one, which is kind of the only thing that people really play in Grisly Totem decks, like, kind of just like on rate, you're kind of actually skipping the level 0 Grisly Totem and running something else in its slot until you can pay for the experienced version. A lot of the time when I build these decks, I actually just take in the thick of it for the level 3 Grisly Totem and then upgrade and then add another one into my deck later. I look over this card completely because I think it's just, it does nothing on its own. It's a cool multi-class card, but Grisly Totem is just left in the dust. Thanks for watching, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this card of the week. I'll see you guys next week for another one. But in the meantime, if you want to support the channel, like, comment, and subscribe, all that usual stuff. If you want to go above and beyond, you can join our Patreon and join all these cool names over here. Everyone say bye to Russ. He's now sleeping. A little cute little boy right there. Thanks for watching. Have a good one. And as always, a GG's.